For our next lesson, we're going to look at Chicago jazz. Jazz, like the blues, originated in New Orleans and moved up the river to St. Louis and then to the clubs of Chicago. So they have some similarities, but there are some big differences too. Uh, Blues was about one person with a guitar, and it was kind of slower and sad, as you saw in the original Robert Johnson clip of Sweet Home Chicago. Jazz had already evolved to be lots of instruments, and it was quite up-tempo and celebratory, even a little wild, but very structured as well. So it comes up and it changes in different ways. It also adds instruments. One thing particularly is more improvisation develops in jazz. That also develops in blues later, but they kind of go off in different directions once they're in Chicago. Also, within jazz, white musicians in Chicago pick up that up early, and they kind of go off in their own direction with it. Benny Goodman, Gene Krupa, these go off and they're the origins of swing, and then vocally they go off to what we call song stylists. And we're not going to deal much with song stylists in our study. We're going to stick with the more traditional track that stayed in the primarily African American clubs of Chicago. One thing particularly I want you to pay attention to is something that evolved called scat singing. Scat singing is where you use the human voice not to speak lyrics, but as though it were a musical instrument. So our first clip today is a very early cut of a Dixieland classic. So this is a Dixieland song, When the Saints Go Marching In. And it's recorded by Louis Armstrong, who moved from New Orleans to Chicago and began working in the clubs and developed his sound here. So this is very early, so you hear a Dixieland melody that is becoming more jazz-like, and that it has more some solos that are starting, and especially I want you to pay attention to the woman behind Louis Armstrong and how she uses her voice, because this is the beginnings of scat singing.